Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. We live in a global economy that is clearly in crisis, but the official economic science that should explain it is staring at its own models and pretending nothing is happening. That is the core conflict. Real industry shrinks, real incomes stagnate, housing is unaffordable, and yet in the textbooks, everything still converges to equilibrium. This gap between theory and reality is not an accident. It is a system choice. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. The people who design the dominant economic models today are not paid to describe reality. They are paid to keep the current architecture intellectually respectable. Let's start with the basics. In most developed economies, industrial output in real terms is still at or below pre-2008 levels. The euro area's industrial production index has been roughly flat for 15 years. Germany, the supposed locomotive, is back to mid-2000s levels. Italy never really recovered from the last crisis. At the same time, asset prices exploded. In many big cities, you now need 8 to 12 average annual salaries to buy a standard apartment where earlier it was 3 to 4. Wages crawl, assets fly, and the official story still calls this price stability. Here's where the story stops making sense. If your theory insists everything is fine while a growing part of the population is locked out of housing and basic security, maybe the theory is the problem, not irrational consumers. Another symptom is what is not studied. Since 2008, the world has seen a systemic financial crisis, the euro crisis, COVID shutdowns, an energy shock, and war-related sanctions. Yet the top awards in mainstream economics, including the famous prize in memory of Alfred Nobel, overwhelmingly go to work on expectations, market design, micro-incentives at the margin. Crises are treated as external shocks, not structural features of the system. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV. If you admit that crises are built into the architecture, then somebody must answer why this architecture is preserved at all costs. Modern liberal economics has turned itself into a kind of scholastic discipline. Extremely elegant mathematics, very clean models, and almost no contact with physical reality, energy flows, industrial capacity, demographics, geopolitical fragmentation. The real economy lives in kilowatt hours, tons, ships, pipelines, birth rates, and debt service. The models live in representative agents and frictionless markets. From my side in Lithuania, watching the Baltic and European periphery, this looks almost comical. You see official reports predicting smooth growth trajectories while local factories close, logistics chains reroute, and young people leave because the only opportunity offered by the model is emigration. If you are in Germany or Poland, I'm curious how this looks from your side. Does the official narrative still feel connected to your daily economic reality, or is it just background noise now? Let's talk about incentives. The current academic establishment in economics is deeply integrated into central banks, finance ministries, global institutions, and large financial players. Their careers, grants, and influence depend on keeping the intellectual frame narrow, markets clear, shocks are temporary, and with the right interest rate plus a bit of targeted support, everything re-equilibrates. Inside this frame, there is very little room for questions like, what happens to a system where public and private debt together reach 300 to 400% of GDP? What happens when entire generations are priced out of asset ownership? What happens when de-industrialization meets aging populations and expensive energy? These are not marginal questions. They define whether your pension, your job, and your city will exist in 20 years. Here is where the story really stops making sense. We see visible signs of structural crisis, long-term productivity slowdown, shrinking working-age populations, permanent emergency budgets, geopolitical trade wars. And yet the core models used for policy still assume globalization, cheap transport, stable geopolitics, and predictable climate as a given background. The original text that I'm building on uses a harsh but accurate term, pseudo-economic modeling. The point is not that all economists are idiots. The point is that the dominant school has chosen to treat its own axioms as sacred and real-world contradictions as noise. So what happens next? My view is similar. They will not reform themselves. This is not a community that will suddenly wake up and say, we were wrong for 40 years. Let's rebuild from the ground up. More likely, they will keep publishing the same style of papers, teaching the same syllabi, and giving the same advice, while the rest of society silently walks away. The adjustment will come from outside. As crises intensify, new political elites will emerge with very different questions, not what is the optimal tax in a frictionless model, But how do we keep food, energy, and basic production under control in a fragmented world? They will need people who understand logistics, energy systems, industrial policy, debt dynamics, and social stability, not just comparative statics. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this: demand for practical economic thinking will grow as the system becomes more unstable, and supply will increasingly come from outside the old academic clubs. This shift will be slow, unpleasant, and full of conflicts. Funding for the old paradigm will be cut gently at first, then more aggressively. Entire departments will be rebranded as policy labs or interdisciplinary institutes, with fewer seats and less prestige. The remaining purists will retreat into smaller, aging circles where they can preserve the liturgy of their models for a few more decades. For ordinary people, this doesn't look heroic. It looks like long periods of confusion. Official forecasts keep failing. Reforms don't deliver what they promise. Inflation indices say 2 to 3%, while your basket and your rent say more like 10 to 15%. Trust in experts erodes. And into that gap step populists, conspiracy theorists, and also a few serious practitioners who really try to measure what is happening. In the Baltics and wider Eastern Europe, the stakes are even higher. Our economies imported not only Western capital and technology, but also Western ideological frameworks. We were told that if we follow the textbook, integrate, deregulate, and privatize, the convergence will be automatic. Instead, we are watching a core that is itself stuck and a periphery that is still told to be flexible while carrying the shock. If you're in Southern Europe, does this match your reality or Brussels fantasy? Are you still hearing about textbook convergence, or are you already living in permanent, temporary adjustment? In the end, the story about modern economic science is not about egos or academic fashions. It is about whether our societies are guided by tools that describe reality or by tools that protect the status of those who broke it. The current mainstream chose comfort over truth. Reality will answer by quietly defunding it and replacing it with something harsher, more empirical, and much less elegant. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids, systems do.